Welcome to Simmons Says, where I help emerging and struggling writers create intriguing plots and compelling characters to make their stories hard to put down and even harder to forget. Hey there, everybody. Simmons Says, here I am again, saying what I tend to say when I'm Simmons. This time I want to talk to you about world building. As a writer, a lot of times we get caught up in trying to figure out what's the plot of the story, or how do we develop these characters? How do we keep it engaging, compelling, intriguing, whatever elements that we think really make a story stand out and again, sellable. But a lot of times we sort of forget the importance of creating the world in which the story takes place. Now, there's some very basic ways to do that. You want to ask yourself certain questions like, how well do I really need to know the world that I'm going to be utilizing for my story, that my story is going to take place in? What do I know about it? What do I really need to know about it? That's another way of looking at that. I mean, there are certain things that we know from our day-to-day lives. We know our neighborhoods. We know how we interact with certain people. We know how to get from one place to another, using public transportation or driving or whatever. So, we have these familiar patterns that we've already established. We're familiar with that, and so we can use it in a story. But if we're creating a world or utilizing a world that we don't know that well, then it becomes key that we make certain decisions. Now, for example, I've written Scooby Doo, Batman, Superman, Archie, Tarzan, and Sherlock Holmes for other publishers. And as a kid, I watched Scooby Doo, and I, of course, grew up reading Batman and Superman and Archie. And so I was very familiar, also Tarzan. I was very familiar with the lore, the myth, the worlds that these characters move through. I knew that Scooby and Shaggy and Velma and Fred and Daphne, 4 human friends and a dog. And I knew through the cartoons that whatever mystery they had to solve was usually going to be very formulaic. The monster, the ghost, or whatever was going to turn out to be somebody pretending to be. Until many years later, in one of the many different versions of the series, they did the Mystery Incorporated, and suddenly they were dealing with real ghosts. But what was more important about Mystery Incorporated was that it took them back to their hometown, and it established all this backstory that for at least 20 years, we had no access to. It was never established for the general public. So now they had family, they had history, they had traumas, they had all these other things that made the Scooby world that much larger. With Batman, well, most people know the villains that he goes up against. They know what happened to his parents initially, but depending on whose version of Batman's mythos, how he became who he became. Yeah, his parents died, but in different situations, depending on who was writing it during a particular decade. And what was the world of Gotham like? In a certain period of time, it was an average city with exotic criminals. As the years rolled on, it became a little bit more bizarre and gothic. It had a certain sort of mystique about it, almost more like a supernatural environment in some ways. The designs became more gothic and more Hunchback of Notre Dame and that sort of feel to it. Superman, well, he's still the big blue Boy Scout. Metropolis, again, depending on when you're reading it, is an average city, a spectacular city, a very modern, high-tech city. All of these things are influenced by the writers and the society at a particular time in the history of these iconic characters. So for me as a writer, I had to get to know, A, what I knew about those characters in their world, what I needed to know about those characters and the world they existed within, and then what was necessary for me to share in my stories to make the world in which they were moving seem authentic so that the audience, the readers, would buy into it, would accept it. Now, when I started creating my own stories, my own individual characters, my own fictional worlds, well, now I had a certain amount of freedom because I was making this up from scratch. So this was kind of fun for me in one way. when I was a teenager and writing stories, I had something that was sort of inspired by the dead-end kids and old sort of 1940s into the 50s group of teenagers in Hell's Kitchen, New York, and the different things that they got involved in, stopping crime and silly things, and sometimes family situations. But it was that inspired the Blind Alley Kids. But the Blind Alley Kids were based on me and a couple of my friends and what we were experiencing growing up in New York City. And then we threw in mystery and adventure into that. With the Clues Kids, years later, I had foster kids brought into the home of a retired police officer and his wife. And so the town had a humorous feel to it. There was still mysteries going on. And then each child had his or her own background coming from their various experiences and why they were no longer living with their parents and what that world was like. And so I had to know something about each of those children, about their background, and then about the town and how the town reacted to that. This was a world that, again, I was able to fabricate from my imagination. Now, when I was working on Sherlock Holmes, both the original play that I wrote, but then later some stories that I wrote that were Holmes' adventures, well, I still had Victorian England to reference. What did I know about that era? What did I need to research about that era? What did I need to show in my stories to make that era seem more authentic and solid? What could I leave up to the imagination of the reader? These were things I had to determine. And when I did a spin-off series called The Ravens League, where I was working with street kids who used to help Sherlock Holmes, well, now I'm going deeper into the poorer neighborhoods of London. And what was that mixed bag like? Was it just Irish and British children? No, there were kids from the West Indies there. There were kids who were East Indian. There were Jewish kids. There were all of these other elements. And so I had to do some research to get a sense of what was that flavor like, the Italians, where were they? What was that area like? How many synagogues were there? And once I had a sense of that, what did I need to reveal in my stories to make it feel more authentic? Same can be said for my character Blackjack, which takes place in the 1930s. So again, research to build up that backdrop. The Demon Chronicles, when I was doing a supernatural series, what did I need to show in terms of the mythology of vampires, werewolves, and things like that, as well as, religious beliefs and different beliefs from different cultures? What did I need to show? And when I was working on a sci-fi series of mine, my own project, this is in the future, but is with teenagers. And again, what was the world like, or what is the world like at this future time? What has changed? What do I know enough about to just go from my experience and my own expertise? And then what did I have to research? And then what, because it's the future, what could I project? What's happening now that if I projected might be so outrageously different 100 years from now? If, again, we are within a civilization, or what we call a civilization, 100 years from now. So it really does boil down to understanding certain very basics. Once again, what do you know already? What do you need to know? What do you need to research, right, in order to get clear on how to represent that? Right? How much do you need to show in your story in order for your reader or your audience to believe the environment that they're in, that the story takes place in, or that the characters are moving through? How much do you need to reveal? How much can you just hint at? And how much can you leave up to our imagination? The bottom line of it is some of that you will discover when you're just working out the basics of your story. Some of that will develop as you write your story. And some of that you will discover in the magnificent, wonderful, freeing world of revisions, rewrites, tweaking and fine-tuning your story, discovering those blessed, beautiful moments of, oh, I can do this, I can do that with this. I didn't think of that before, but now I can put that in here. Those are those bursts of inspiration that are so exciting and so much fun to look forward to. So you don't have to have it all mapped out at the very beginning. I mean, if you're good like that and you can do that, great. But otherwise, think of it as you're on a path to discovery. And what you'll discover, the wonder of that, is something worth waiting for. Okay, that's it for now. One more Simmons Says on the table for you. Take care.